It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. The diversity drive, which discriminated against white men. An apology, compensation, but no sackings at the top of the RAF. Sky News first revealed a whistleblower's concerns and the potential recruits called useless white male pilots. Also tonight, unjustified undercover. The police who had relationships and even children inside activist groups, and the warning they're still being targeted today. Why the government's small boats policy looks lost at sea as any flights to Rwanda are blocked by a top court. Taking the pulse of NHS training as the government prepares to announce a huge increase in places at medical school. Paying passengers at the final frontier, the first commercial flight for Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. The RAF's motto means through adversity to the stars. And the Air Force's new leader admitted today that some potential recruits had indeed faced adversity, illegal discrimination, as a result of a diversity drive. Some white male applicants had failed to gain training places because of positive discrimination in favour of ethnic minority and female recruits. Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton said he apologised unreservedly to those affected, including a senior whistleblower whose case was first revealed by Sky News. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, first reported on the scandal last August and was there for the denouement.
General salute!
The previous head of the Air Force had wanted to push the limits to improve diversity. Instead, the RAF ended up discriminating against white men on his watch.
It is now time for me to pass command of the Royal Air Force to Air Chief Marshal Sir Rich Knighton.
Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wigston handed over command earlier this month, so it's been left to the new boss to face the music about a policy that prioritised pushing women and ethnic minority recruits onto training courses ahead of white men. Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton said the belief at the time was that this practice demonstrated acceptable, positive action. We now know that it did not, and I apologise unreservedly to all those affected. We accept that some men were discriminated against. An inquiry was launched after Sky News last year revealed the then head of recruitment, Group Captain Lizzie Nicholl, had resigned over what she deemed to be an unlawful order. The RAF has now published the findings that prove she was right. Legal advice Group Captain Nicholl sought said that previous recruitment activity to fast-track women and ethnic minorities onto training courses had been contrary to the Equality Act. But the head of recruitment still had to resign to stop it happening again. I've just come out from a briefing in the Ministry of Defence with the new Chief of the Air Staff. He talked us through the content of the report. He said it makes pretty uncomfortable reading. He said the Air Force is determined to learn lessons. But he also said that nobody is being held responsible for what happened. No one is facing disciplinary action, even though the RAF broke the law. The Defence Secretary said the RAF had made a significant error.
I also think that the treatment of the officer who raised concerns and her very genuine worries being ignored was something that needs to be looked at considerably about why she was ignored.
The former head of the Air Force has admitted mistakes were made, but previously denied any unlawful activity.
Some of what you said in your opening remarks implied that there were different standards applied, that there was active discrimination against people who, white men, but that was not the case.
Air Chief Marshal Wigston may have stepped down as head of the RAF, but he probably won't be able to step back from the fallout.
And Deborah Haynes is at the Ministry of Defence for us tonight. And Deborah, can it really stand that no one will be held responsible?
Well, we spoke earlier this afternoon to Tobias Elwood, who's the head of the Defence Select Committee that you just saw in my report. He said it just cannot be the case that no one is being held to account. I also interviewed James Heapy, the Armed Forces Minister, last year when we first broke this story, and he said that any evidence of discrimination would not be tolerated. So where are we tonight? Yes, the new head of the Air Force has done the right thing. He's come out, he's published this report in full. He's admitted that mistakes were made. He's apologised unreservedly. He said that those impacted will be compensated. But he has not said whether anyone would be held responsible. In fact, he said he just wants lessons to be learned and the RAF to move on. So the only person to have effectively lost their job over this is the very group captain who had the courage to stand up and say that she believed the RAF was ordering her to do something that is unlawful, and those above her seem to have been unimpacted by this so far. And to all the people watching this unfold, they just believe that it is just not fair.
OK, Deborah, thank you. Well, another institution, the Metropolitan Police, apologised for the enormous distress caused by officers who worked undercover as part of a shadowy unit in the 70s and 80s. Tasked with tracking activist groups, some formed relationships and even fathered children with their unknowing targets. A senior police officer wouldn't rule out similar groups being targeted today, but said the checks and balances were completely different. Our Home editor, Jason Farrell, reports.
A banner outside portrayed the police as criminals, as an inquiry found the Met's undercover operations were intrusive and unjustified. People like Jessica hide their identity because they feel they were sexually abused by the state. She'd entered a relationship with a police officer who was spying on her.
I never gave consent to sleep with, to have sex with an undercover officer.
And how did you feel when you found out that this person was an undercover police officer?
Sick to my stomach, to be honest. I was 19, he was my first sexual relationship, and to think at the time he was 24 years old. I found out then that he was 32, married, undercover police officer.
Please clear the area. Go further away from this area.
This first tranche of the inquiry examines a time when Northern Ireland troubles threatened the mainland and there were Cold War fears of communism. But there was also general unrest, and mostly the targets weren't serious criminals or terrorists, just activists.
Trade unions, environmental campaigns, political parties that are perfectly legal have been seen as a legitimate target in a war against their own citizens.
The report identifies 4 areas that should have been addressed when this unit was set up. First, the inevitable intrusion into the lives of many hundreds of people. Second, that any undercover officer would be a trespasser on people's property. Third, they'd have to take up positions of responsibility in the groups they infiltrate, and where would that lead? And fourth, the spies' use of deceased children's identities would surely lead to public concern if discovered.
The unanswered question in this first report is who knew at what level that these things were going on. The report author certainly thinks that the likes of Home Secretaries and Met Commissioners should have been told, but there's also an inference that even if they weren't, they should have been able to work it out.
So what has changed?
Do police officers still use deceased babies' names?
Absolutely not.
Do police officers sleep with women who do not know that they're police officers?
Absolutely not.
But what about disruptive groups like Just Stop Oil? Are they today's targets?
All I can say is that every time there is a consideration for deploying undercover officers, the regime now for checks and balances is completely different to what it was 40 to 50 years ago.
So today's activists might be spied on, but in a more regulated way.
Today's report is just the beginning.
And this is just an interim report. The full inquiry findings are expected in 3 years' time. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Rwanda is one of the safest countries in the world, its government said today, but the Court of Appeal here begs to differ. It overturned the government's plan to deport asylum seekers there on the basis that the judges couldn't be sure they wouldn't be then sent on to their home countries. The Prime Minister said he fundamentally disagreed with the judgment and there will be an attempt to appeal. Our political correspondent Liz Bates reports.
Stop the boats. Rishi Sunak's pledge to the country. Easy to say, but the Prime Minister reminded today how hard it is to deliver. The Court of Appeal ruling against the government's Rwanda plan.
There is a real risk that persons sent to Rwanda will be returned to their home countries where they faced persecution or other inhumane treatment when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. And that unless and until the deficiencies in its asylum processes are corrected, removal of asylum seekers to Rwanda will be unlawful.
The government now with another legal fight on its hands. The Home Secretary voicing her dismay.
The Prime Minister and I have made a promise to the British people to stop the boats. We are committed to delivering on that promise. We've got an unsustainable problem that we need to fix. And whilst, of course, we are disappointed with the decision today, we will be putting in an application to seek permission to appeal.
Maybe even more than the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary has staked her political career on stopping the boats. Central to that, the goal of getting these flights off the ground as early as this summer. Now that's been blocked by the courts, Conservative MPs are getting restless. The opposition are making the most of it.
The government's got no plan. It's got a gimmick, which is the Rwanda scheme, a gimmick which has already cost the taxpayer £140 million and nobody's been removed. And now we know from the court judgment this morning that the government didn't even do the basics to make sure that it was fit for purpose.
A sentiment shared by some in Scampton, where this old RAF base will become a temporary stop for those seeking asylum.
The fact that it's been ruled as illegal, that should have been looked into before they even started spending money sort of trying to implement that plan.
The whole thing has been immensely stressful for the majority of people, and one of the biggest stresses, and I cannot emphasise this enough, one of the biggest stresses is the lack of engagement from the Home Office. We have had nothing.
The Home Secretary says it's her dream to see asylum seekers deported to Rwanda, but to its opponents, the policy is a nightmare they will do anything to prevent. For now, the battle goes on with high stakes on all sides. Liz Bates, Sky News, Westminster.
Protesters threw projectiles at police who responded with tear gas in the third day of violence in France after the shooting of a teenage boy. 40,000 officers are deployed to try to stop violence tonight after the country's interior minister told those demonstrating that professionals of disorder must go home. The shooting, which sparked the protest, took place in the suburb of Nanterre, about 7 miles to the northwest of Paris. From there, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
Suddenly, street battles are normal in Nanterre. Riot police firing tear gas and protesters hurling rocks and fireworks back at them. This was the same square where 17-year-old Nael died on Tuesday morning, shot by the police. These clashes were loaded with fury and mistrust. This man asking people to film the police everywhere all the time. Nael's killing was filmed by a passerby. And at the heart of this protest, Nael's mother, here holding the flare, the focal point of support. She led a march through Nanterre that attracted thousands from across this community. Many knew her son. Bruno's lived in Nanterre his whole life, his children the same age as Nael and the passengers who were with him in the car.
They know his friend, the one who got away. He's hiding because if he gets caught by the police, we'll never see him again. And he's the main witness.
The prosecutor has now charged the police officer involved in the shooting with voluntary homicide, but that hasn't quelled the tension.
Well, the death of Nael was the catalyst for this protest, but there is a lot more behind us. This is a community that feels forgotten, disenfranchised. And also, look around you. You can't see a single uniformed police officer here. These people consider the police to be the enemy.
The government's reaction is to summon a lot more police to protect the streets of France.
Disorder professionals must go home. I've decided there'll be 40,000 police and gendarmes mobilised this evening and tonight, including 5,000 in Paris, and significant technical and technological means will be provided to fight against these riots, to carry out arrests and to restore the republican order that the French legitimately expect.
This is what we saw last night in Nanterre. Fires burning wildly, destroying property. In the darkness, in parts of France, there is now a sense of lawlessness and anarchy. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Nanterre.
Well, our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins is in Nanterre tonight. And Siobhan, has that huge promised police presence had an impact tonight?
Well, we have seen more violence this evening. If I move out of the way, you can see a bank behind me which was set on fire earlier this evening. The fire brigade still there going through it, trying to make it safe. You can also see debris on the ground there from other things that were burnt. And as we were walking to this area, we saw the remains of tear gas canisters, pellets on the floor. It looked like people had been picking up bricks from the local park to throw as well. So a huge amount of anger still. It has calmed down here at the moment, but there are problems being reported in other parts of France. So in Marseille, for example, in Lyon, in Lille. And I guess the concern is that 40,000 police presence could go either way. It could either deter people or it could just stir them up further. And it's one of those situations where we're really only going to find out as the night goes on.
OK, Siobhan, for the moment, thank you. Well, the fact that the Crown estates own the seabed around Britain is a facet of history that dates back 1,000 years. It's proved a profitable facet, though, in the past year, as wind farm development helped drive a profit of nearly £500 million. Much of that money goes to the Treasury, but some back to the royal family. And their latest accounts show that, like everyone else, they're feeling the impact of inflation, as our royal correspondent Laura Bundock explains.
The sovereign grant comes from the Crown estate, a vast and diverse £16 billion portfolio of property, including London's West End and Regent Street, and land portfolios, agricultural, coastal and most of the seabed. It belongs to the reigning monarch, but all of the revenue goes to the Treasury, which gives a percentage back to the palace, and that's the sovereign grant. It's currently just over £86 million. Now, although the London property portfolio has taken a hit, dropping by £500 million, the Crown estate generated profits of £442 million. Now, this increase was largely driven by 6 offshore wind farm licences, which increased revenue by more than £500 million. Now, we're all facing the pressure of rising costs, and so too are the royal family. Although the sovereign grant is £86.3 million, they spent more, £107.5 million, which means they've had to dip into their reserves. Where's the money going? Well, here are some of the costs. Payroll. Like many businesses, their labour costs are up nearly £3.5 million. Rising energy bills too. Their gas bill went up almost £1 million. And big events last year, like the Platinum Jubilee and the Queen's funeral, meant much higher hospitality costs, rising by over £1 million. All of these extra costs mean palace reserves have dropped over £22 million. Now, these are still huge sums of money, and that's, of course, before you add in the cost of security, which isn't covered by the sovereign grant, or the incomes from the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall. And as ever, the big challenge for the royal family, showing and proving their public service is worth the cost.
The US Supreme Court has ruled that race cannot be used by colleges as a determining factor in admissions. So-called affirmative action has been used by universities for decades to increase diversity. The court's decision has been criticised by President Biden.
I believe our colleges are stronger when they're racially diverse. Our nation is stronger because we are tapping into the full range of talent in this nation. I also believe that while talent, creativity, and hard work are everywhere across this country, not equal opportunity. It is not everywhere across this country. We cannot let this decision be the last word.
Nearly a third of people in the United States will experience poor air quality today as smoke continues to blow over from wildfires burning in Canada. Air quality alerts are in effect from Wisconsin to New York. The Kremlin has refused to answer questions about the whereabouts of one of its key generals leading the war in Ukraine. General Sergei Surovikin, who has ties to the Wagner Group leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, hasn't been seen since Saturday's short-lived rebellion. The government will set out a 15-year plan for the NHS workforce tomorrow. The health service has more than 100,000 vacancies, and while those gaps won't be filled quickly, the number of places in medical school and nurse training is expected to double. One future midwife we spoke to today said working in the NHS would mean challenges, but will also be very rewarding. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
Sam, I'm just going to listen to baby's heart rate. Is that okay?
Belinda and Rita are in their last year as student midwives. Soon they'll be doing this every day for real.
So baby's nice and happy, okay?
Joining a health service under pressure and understaffed, with over 110,000 NHS job vacancies.
This is when we need to look to the government to increase apprenticeship opportunities and to increase the opportunity for people to train and join the NHS.
The government's long-awaited 15-year NHS workforce plan is expected to double medical school and nursing training places. 8 months of consecutive strikes over pay have resulted in more than 650,000 routine operations and appointments being cancelled. Those on the picket line say that care is already under threat due to poor working conditions and staff shortages. This workforce plan has been repeatedly delayed, and that's caused real frustration for NHS Trust leaders. Now, at last, they'll have some direction and some reassurance, but this is a long-term project and not a short-term fix for the problems that exist right now.
Come on, come here, Nika. I was basically told I'd have a few months to live, and that was 6 months ago.
Sue has a blocked artery and lives with the risk of suffering a stroke. She has had 8 potentially life-saving operations delayed so far this year.
Can't go anywhere, do anything, and at any moment I could thud on the floor. And as there is a lifeline, an opportunity of an operation, it's very frustrating.
Ventilate. An ageing population suffering from more complex illnesses will need a reliable, modern and well-staffed health service. The next generation of NHS workers are hoping they can play their part. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Kent.
Women who are concerned about a study potentially linking hormone replacement therapy with a higher risk of dementia are being advised to talk to their GP. Millions have benefited from HRT since it was first introduced, and the latest research appears to clash with other findings that HRT can protect against Alzheimer's disease. Becky Cottrell reports.
Katie Taylor's symptoms before menopause were so severe she worried she might have early onset dementia. But hormone patches changed everything.
It was like a dark fog had just lifted. I hadn't realised, I hadn't laughed in 4 years, and suddenly my husband and my kids sort of said, look, I've got my wife back, I've got my mum back. I just felt joy, the cognition was back, I could concentrate. I just felt back to my old self.
More women in the UK have begun taking hormone replacement therapy, leading to recent shortages. Clinical trials investigating a potential link to Alzheimer's present a confusing picture, it's fair to say. A new study from Denmark found that compared with women who never used HRT, those who did had a 24% higher risk of an eventual dementia diagnosis. The risk increased with the duration of treatment, reaching 74% for people who took HRT for more than 12 years. But the Danish study contradicts other research which suggests HRT may help prevent Alzheimer's disease.
We need more research to understand the risk factors of dementia, to understand what's driving the diseases that cause dementia, to understand how we can prevent or reduce risk over the long term.
The NHS says the benefits of hormone replacement therapy usually outweigh the risks. Women shouldn't come off their medication just because of this new research.
I've had loads of emails this morning. I've had people messaging me in our Facebook group, on our Instagram channel, worried and saying, well, should I come off my HRT or I'm not going to start it now? And it's really awful, actually.
While more studies are needed, the confusion around these treatments can be seriously distressing, especially when the stakes are so high for so many women. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, North London.
Let's take a look at the cricket today for you. And England have fought back on day 2 of the second Ashes test at Lord's, trailing Australia by 138 runs at the close. After getting Australia all out for 416, opener Ben Duckett fell just short of his first Ashes century, edging Josh Hazlewood to David Warner when on 98. Duckett was applauded back into the dressing room, but his frustration was compounded minutes later because Steve Smith's catch was even better than Warner's. Joe Root this time, top edging it from Mitchell Starc. Replays showed he just got his fingertips to the ball, and another wicket was gone. But Ben Stokes and Harry Brooks saw out the rest of the session to take England to 278 for 4. It is Richard Branson's hope that a giant leap towards space tourism. His firm, Virgin Galactic, took its first paying passengers to the edge of space today. They were Italian researchers, carried more than 50 miles up to experience a few minutes of weightlessness. There are many hundreds more said to be ready to pay up to £350,000 per seat. Well, the 90-minute mission took off from Spaceport America in New Mexico desert. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
3, 2, 1, release, release, release.
It's been a long time coming, 2 decades after founding Virgin Galactic, Sir Richard Branson sending his first paying customers to the edge of space.
Our mission specialists have been cleared to unstrap and enjoy the zero-G experience.
These were not the super rich or famous, but 3 employees of the Italian government who funded this flight. The commander on board, Air Force Colonel Walter Villaday, enjoying a few minutes of weightlessness and a moment in history.
Amazing. And viva la Italia!
Throughout the 90-minute flight, the team conducted scientific experiments, including how certain liquids and solids mix in microgravity.
An amazing day. I mean, we flew a successful mission. We accomplished all our tasks, and most of all, we enjoyed the flight. And so that's really a remarkable and unforgettable day for all of us.
Branson hopes now to send 1 tourist flight every month to the edge of the atmosphere. Tickets cost between £200,000 and £350,000. But this sort of extreme tourism is under the microscope following the deaths of 5 people on board Titan's submersible. Commercial space tourism shares many parallels with deep-sea exploration, not least the inherent risks.
Over the threshold, that's the beginning of the runway.
VSS Unity landed safely, but shares in Virgin Galactic dipped nearly 10% on touchdown when it comes to convincing the world that this is the future. Mission, as yet, not accomplished. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview, including The Telegraph, which says the biggest NHS reforms in its history will attempt to save £10 billion. Tonight, we're going to be joined by the Daily Express columnist and broadcaster Carol Malone and the editor of the Courier in Dundee, David Clegg. Do stay with us for more. welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The Ministry of Defence has apologised after an inquiry found that the Royal Air Force unlawfully discriminated against white men with its recruitment drive to increase diversity. The government has said it will go to the Supreme Court after the Court of Appeal ruled that plans to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda are unlawful. And tens of thousands of police officers have been deployed in France as unrest continues in the wake of the fatal police shooting of a teenager. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Express columnist and broadcaster Carol Malone and the editor of the Courier in Dundee, David Clegg. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Metro leads with a blow for the government as the Court of Appeal has ruled its plan to send migrants to Rwanda is unlawful. According to The Guardian, the decision risks a bitter legal feud. The Mail insists Rishi Sunak should decide who comes to the UK, not people smugglers, as part of their flagship immigration scheme. The Express has news of an initiative which, if successful, would see hundreds of thousands more doctors, nurses and other staff trained by the NHS with the aim of retaining them for longer. The Daily Telegraph carries the same story, claiming it could be the biggest ever set of reforms in the NHS in an attempt to save £10 billion. The story also leads on The Times, saying there's a blueprint to boost the NHS workforce by 200,000. According to The Eye, 6 of the country's biggest banks have raised their mortgage rates again in a deliberate attempt not to offer the cheapest deals. The Financial Times says UK households withdrew record amounts from bank accounts last month in search of higher interest rates. The Daily Mirror headlines with a letter from Poppy pushing the Prime Minister about the need for free meals in primary schools. David's paper, The Courier, reports that the Tayside NHS Trust blamed junior doctors for the failings of a surgeon who faked his qualifications and botched a number of procedures. And The Star tells us that apparently boffins don't like being called boffins. That's news for you. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Carol Malone and David Clegg. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the front page of the Metro. And their story, their headliner, Grounded Hog Day for Rishi, a pun there that we've kind of seen this story before, haven't we, David?
We have seen it. I'm not sure that particular pun works particularly
not
well.
Really.
But the point that the Metro are making is that we have been here before with legal challenges to this policy to get on top of the small boat crisis by deterring people from trying to come and claim asylum here by sending them to Rwanda. Now, the ruling today from the Court of Appeal is that this is not legal because Rwanda is not a safe and secure place. Now, it's worth saying that was only a majority verdict of the court, and I suspect that there will be a further legal challenge on this now to the Supreme Court. But I think ultimately, from the government's perspective, if you're looking at this on a policy basis rather than a political basis, and if you're looking at a political basis, the calculation could well be difficult or different. But if your idea is here, what can we implement that will work, that will efficiently deal with this crisis that has been going on for so long and has been getting progressively worse, this is a policy which we have now seen this week is going to cost a fortune. There is concerns about whether it can practically be implemented. It is clearly going to be marred in further legal challenges for a great deal of time to come, even if the UK government is ultimately successful in getting this decision struck down. So it seems to me that if we're looking for a quick and efficient solution to this problem, it's clear that Rwanda is not that solution.
And Carol, just how damaging is this to Rishi Sunak, following on from his personal pledge to stop the boats?
I think it's damaging in that sense that he can't say, well, we tried and we failed. He has said, we will stop the boats, and he said it again. And I think that's what's that is, he has to do that now. He doesn't have a choice. You know, and I think David was, I just want to take what David said, that this Rwanda thing is not the way. It absolutely is the way, because while we've been waiting for the appeal court's decision, the number of crossings has lessened because a lot of the migrants were waiting to see what the court said. And if they had ruled against them, they would not have come over. So all this policy is about, really, it's about deterring people from coming here. And it did, just waiting for this decision.
Carol, where do we get that stat that fewer people are now coming?
I just read it in one of the papers tonight. I don't know which one. I've read every single paper tonight. It's in one of the papers, and it says that the numbers coming in recent weeks has been less while they've been waiting for this decision. I mean, you can do a fact check while I
think it's very hard to draw a direct correlation to know what's in the minds of people, even if the figure is correct.
You would know what was in their minds, not to pay $4,000 to come here if the High Court was then, if the appeal court was then going to send them to Rwanda. They wouldn't be paying the $4,000 to the traffickers, which I think is the important thing. This is always about being a deterrent. And I think, yes, it's tough.
But just on that, Carol, the evidence we saw this week is it would need to deter 2 and 5 just to break even, based on that economic calculation that was done this week that said it was going to cost £169,000 per person to send to Rwanda.
We're talking about the ongoing problem of tens of thousands coming here every year, where we don't have the infrastructure to deal with them, the housing. We can't afford it. Asylum is costing £3 billion a year now. We're paying £6 million a day to put these people up in hotels. Whole communities are being disrupted when they get landed with a lot of people from these boats. It is all about deterrent. And I think Rishi is in trouble today, but I think the government's been very bullish. Both Suella Braverman has said today that they've got until July the 6th to submit the papers. A number 10 Downing Street source said tonight that the lawyers had been poring over the paperwork all day, the appeal court's report, poring over the paperwork, and they are bullish about the fact they think they have a good argument that can win the case when it goes to the Supreme Court. The problem for Rishi, of course, here now is time. That is his problem, because we have an election in about 18 months. We're told that even if the Supreme Court takes it on, and they can do, because one judge dissented, it wasn't unanimous, they're saying that they might not even look at that until Christmas. So their decision will come sometime after that. So yes, he's on a race against the clock now to stop this.
Yeah, and we know that the scheme's going to cost about £140 million. But on top of that, David, this legal wrangling, I mean, that's going to cost as well. And The Guardian talking about a bitter legal feud. Who knows how long that will go on for?
I think that's the point. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's also going to take a long time. It's clear that this is legally contested ground, that there is uncertainty about this. The outcome is uncertain, but what we do know for a fact is that it is going to take a long time to resolve the legalities of this, and there's going to be a lot more cost incurred by the taxpayer to find out what that answer is going to be. Meanwhile, the boats will be continuing to come. So it seems from my perspective that what the government should really be doing, if they do want to stop the boats, is going back to the drawing board and thinking of some new ideas about what they can do to tackle this.
Like what, David? Like what? You know, the thing is, everybody keeps on saying, oh, we've got to get the traffickers. That is just, it's such an easy get out, because to get the traffickers, you're not just getting the guys who are bringing the boats over. This is a massive worldwide organisation that is controlling this. And no one has been able to get close to who's at the head of it. So it's very easy to say, get the travellers and let's have another solution. But what solution? You know, when it was suggested we turn back the boat, there was uproar there among the Labour and the Lib Dems saying this would be inhumane. So what other solution is there? I mean, you know, you should tell the government, because I think they'd really like to know.
If I had a quick solution that I could give you in 30 seconds, Carol, I would have outlined it already. But I think one issue that there's talking about is providing safe and legal routes so that people with legitimate claims can make a claim, because that is an issue that is continually raised, and I've yet to hear the government respond to it satisfactorily.
We have safe legal
I agree
routes
with you that this is a really intractable, thorny problem that has caused successive prime ministers now difficulty, but Rishi Sunak has staked his reputation on solving this, and clearly his chosen path is not a good or workable solution at the present time. So it seems to me that the only solution or the only course of action, the only viable course of action from that is to have a plan B, to have a backup.
Carol, one of the sorry, just to explore further, one of the reasons given for Rwanda not being the solution is that it's ruled it's not a safe third country. That's a direct quote from Duncan Lewis solicitors, Tawfiq Hussain, one of the lawyers, that Rwanda simply isn't safe.
Well, you know, I don't understand that, because it is a holiday destination. It is one of the most prosperous economies in Africa. It is in a list of 190 countries around the world. It's the 29th most popular to do business in. So I don't quite get how it's not a safe country. If they're talking about not being safe for the LGBT community, which I heard one commentator talking about today, well, I'm not quite sure that stacks up, because homosexuality is not illegal in Rwanda. However, it is illegal in 26 Commonwealth countries, but we never hear the left or the Liberal Democrats going on about that. Homosexuality is legal in Rwanda. So the idea that these people could be persecuted over there is crazy. I don't get how it's not safe.
So the judges have got it completely wrong then?
In my view, yes, they have. And of course, the Lord Chief Justice thinks they've got it wrong as well. Lord Burnett, he said so.
Okay, let's move on.
I mean, that is certainly true, and it is contested. But my understanding of the two judges who had the majority in this verdict, and therefore it has been implemented, is that while they say that Rwanda is certainly a safe country for tourists, what they're saying is that their judiciary is open to influence by the government, and they can't be confident that this asylum process will be handled properly, and that people may not be sent back improperly to a country where they will face torture. That is my understanding of what they are saying, that they can't trust that process, that will be safe for the people that are involved here. It is certainly the case, and actually there's been some very snobbish and, I think, unfortunate coverage about Rwanda, because it is a country that is safe to visit, is economically well developed, and certainly you can go there on holiday and have a very pleasant time. But that's not what we're discussing here. What we're discussing here is it going to be safe for these people to be sent there after having sought refuge in Britain. I don't know the answer to that.
Now 30 years after, David, 30 years after the Rwandan genocide, it is a safe country. 30 years ago, it was not. And we're talking about doing business with a country. You know, if you look at what happened after the Second World War, after the genocide that happened there with the murder of 6 million Jews, we were doing business with the Germans 20 years after that war finished. The genocide happened 30 years ago, an entirely different government now, entirely different regime. And I'd really like to see the evidence.
The point I was making there, Carol, is this is not a judgment on Rwanda as a country. It's a judgment on Rwanda as a destination for asylum seekers and refugees.
Okay. We could go on all night. Carol, I am going to stop you there, because we could go on and on this subject. So let's take a break. Hold your breath. Not for too long, but until we come back. Stay right where you are. Coming up, apparently banks are now deliberately competing not to offer the cheapest mortgages. We'll discuss that next. Stay with us.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
We help you understand the world with us. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis.
You don't want to be remembered this way. You always want to be remembered as something positive.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again? I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Carol Malone and David Clegg. There they both are. Let's have a look at the Eye front page and more worrying news for homeowners in terms of the mortgage hikes. They're just going up and up and up, Carol.
Yeah, they're saying there that banks are avoiding offering cheap deals because of market volatility, and they're saying that the cheapest fixed rates are 6.37%, even though that the interest rate is 5%. So it is terrifying. In fact, we just Max, one of the lovely guys who puts this show together, has just told us a story today how he's getting his first ever mortgage, and he had to be on the phone for the entire day with his mortgage broker in a queue waiting to get a fixed rate deal at 5.01%. And the deal was closing at 5 o'clock because there were hundreds and hundreds of people waiting to get this deal because of the fear of what's happening. And he got it with 14 minutes to go before the deal closed. I had a similar experience last week about getting a deal. And so people are panicking now because, the volatility is so great. We've seen 3 or 4 0.25% rises in the past few months, and we're told that it's not over yet. So people on that, some people are paying 5-6 times more for their monthly mortgage payments than they were 3 or 4 months ago. As the the fixed rate deals die, they're looking for more. So it is terrifying time for people.
Yes, indeed, and the volatility extends to this story in the Financial Times with record withdrawals from banks, people looking to work with their savings and how they can best deploy them. David.
Yes, and the point that this story's making, which I think is a recurring theme and is always very frustrating, that we say it every time and nothing seems to get done about it, is that one of the reasons they think why there's been this record withdrawal from banks is that while the interest rates on mortgages are skyrocketing, and just to highlight that, I think that rate has risen in 10 days and a little bit to a level that means that but if you're borrowing the average amount, you're paying about an extra £500 a year than what you were getting for just 10 days ago. But what is not happening is the reverse of that, in that the banks are not giving interest or the interest rates to savers in the same way. So you're not getting any kind of return on savings in the same way that you're getting hit at the other end on borrowing. So there's also the issue that and it was 4.6 billion taken out of banks in May, which is the highest amount since records began in 1997, I think, is that people are also obviously dipping into their savings because we've seen this continuing problem with inflation, the cost of living crisis biting, and what is coming in on a monthly basis just isn't covering people's costs, so they're having to dip into their savings if they're lucky enough to have them. I think those two stories together, this continued upwards pressure on interest rates, savings and money in the bank being cleaned out, is just suggesting that those financial headwinds that we've been talking about for months are continuing to get worse, and that we're in for a difficult year in general.
And Carol, just quickly, no suggestion that the interest rate hikes are going to be reflected in terms of people's savings, is there?
No. It's shocking, Jeremy Hunt said this week that he's supposed to be having meetings with the bank and to the banks to try and get them to pass this on. And I still don't understand, Gillian, why Andrew Bailey, the guy who was responsible for all this nonsense, is still in a job. This is the guy who left it too late to raise interest rates, and so we had to do it. And this is why we've had this year of chaos, and people, the prediction is lots of people will lose their homes and there's going to be a housing crash. So this guy is still in his job, and it's terrifying for while he's saving God knows how much a year, people are in prospect of losing their homes.
We must leave it there, but you will have plenty more to say, I'm sure, at the top of the hour. See you at 11. Thank you very much for the moment. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, low pressure to the north of Scotland guarantees a windy weekend with gusts to gale force in the north. The weather will be unsettled too, with showers and longer spells of rain for many. Atlantic cloud and rain will spread in overnight, taking over western parts of the UK mainland by sunrise. Eastern counties will have a dry start to the day with some good sunny spells, but they won't last long. The wet weather will continue its eastward journey through the morning, turning heavy over western hills. Cloud will reach all parts by the middle of the day.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.